I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off-road. The guy managed the group. He was like, what are you doing in this beautiful car? I'm like, I'm going off-road. He's like, are you sure? Because you can use one of ours. And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability, as well as its robust interior, are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Choose Yourself Network. Today on the James Altucher Show.
I remember when I was in rehab, one of the first things one of the counselors said to me was, Rich, are you a human being having a spiritual experience, or are you a spiritual being having a human experience? And I was like, I don't fucking understand that question. Like, can you repeat that? Like, I still, and I think about that almost every single day, but I do believe that we're all spiritual beings having a human experience, that there are lots of things going on around us that we can't understand and perhaps could never understand because of the size of our brains not being large enough or whatever it is. And trusting in that and kind of getting to this place of surrender versus self-will has been one of the most powerful and helpful tools that has guided my life.
Got Rich Roll on the podcast. Rich, how's it going?
Good, man. So happy to be back with you.
Yeah, I think this is like your third or fourth time on, but it's been like a year and a half or 2 years.
It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a long time. And I kind of want to start from scratch a little bit for those who don't know you. You're like, I always think of you as a mega athlete, which is basically how I describe anybody in sports.
Who moves their body.
So, right. But essentially, I'm going to describe your story in a nutshell, and then we could dive in a little bit. And then I just want to ask you about some other things. But you were a hardcore entertainment lawyer for many years. Life was going badly. You were practically having a heart attack while walking up the staircase. You switched your diet. We'll talk specifically how. And then in a matter of weeks from that, you were running. Like, you were already an athlete. And then, I don't know, you've run, what was it called? Like an Ironman type marathon around every island of Hawaii. You've done all these amazing athletic things. Like, what are some of the...
So, well, that's a very nutshell version, very micro. I don't know that it really unfolded in quite that dramatic fashion, but yes. So to answer your first question about the things that I've done, I specialize in like ultra endurance, multi-sport races. So I've done this race a couple times called Ultraman, which is a double Ironman 3-day, 320-mile triathlon that circumnavigates the entire Big Island of Hawaii. So I did that a couple times. I did this thing in 2010 called Epic 5, where a buddy and I did 5 Ironmans on 5 Hawaiian islands in under a week. So that was the other thing I'm kind of known for.
And it seems like that's like a hard level of endurance to keep up. Like you're 46 years old right now?
No, I'm 51 now.
Oh yeah, I knew that. Yeah, you're older than me.
Uh-huh.
So most of the time I have people younger than me on the podcast. Obviously, can you do this now?
I just did a race in September. I hadn't raced for 5 years, and then I turned 50 last year, and I thought, well, it would be interesting to see what I could do as a 50-year-old. It seemed relevant and kind of a way to promote a healthy message of like what a 50-year-old can do. So in September, I did this crazy race called Otillo. It's a Swedish swim run event. I think they pronounce it something like Otillo. I think that's how they say it, which means island to island. And it is a 75-kilometer one-day event that has you swimming and running across 26 islands spread wide across the Stockholm archipelago and the Baltic Sea. So you're literally swimming across these channels and running up on these little islands and running across them and jumping back in the water. And you do that all day. It was like a 10.5-hour race.
And so you did that at age 50.
Yeah, I think it was just before I turned 51, yeah.
And I mean, this is a kind of naive question, but how'd you feel at the end?
That was a very hard day. I mean, the conditions that day were insane. There was like sideways rain and gale force winds, and the chop in the water was just unbelievable. So I think that was probably the most difficult one-day event that I've ever done. It definitely brought me to my knees. I didn't have the greatest performance that day. I mean, I got through it. We did well.
I mean, just getting through it, by the way. I mean,
yeah.
To even complain about the performance, like I never was going to even ask you about the performance.
Mm-hmm.
Like just the fact that you did
it.
Yeah,
it's funny. Like I care, but no one else cares.
Like just saying that you did this race. Yeah, has anyone like, okay, now I'm going to have to ask, like, how long did it take?
Yeah, it was 10 hours and 44 minutes or something like that.
And the winner, how long did he take?
They did it. The interesting thing about this race is you do it as a tandem, as a pair. So you have a teammate that you have to stay within 10 meters of the entire time.
Is that for safety reasons?
No, it's just that's the nature of this event. Like you do it as a duo, which is kind of cool. And my teammate was my coach, who could have been an hour and a half faster without me. I was definitely the limiting factor in our equation. But the fastest guys did it in about 8 hours. So quite a bit faster. And these are like Swedish armed forces guys that like this is their job is to like train for this race.
Right. So when I hear that, I think someone in the armed forces, younger in their peak physical condition, who also knows the terrain probably pretty well. They probably trained on that exact terrain. They did.
That's exactly right.
And they only did it 2 hours faster than you, who you're 51 and didn't train on that terrain as probably as much as them. And that seems incredible to me.
Well, you make me feel a lot better about myself because I look at that and I go, I can't believe those guys were 2 hours faster. How did they do that?
How come, okay, let's explore that for a second. How come you feel bad about that?
That's an interesting question.
I'm just going to guess they're 25 years old and they really are in like peak physical condition and they're probably like do marathon after marathon and they're used to that environment, terrain, everything. Like, of course they're going to win, right? But then 2 hours is only, in a 10.5-hour race is only 20% better than you. So
yeah, I mean, I think that I'm fine with them being faster. I'm not bummed out about that. I think I would have not had that emotional reaction had I felt like I had my best day out there. It's only because I feel like I could have done better. Like I didn't sleep well. I didn't feel good. There's a whole battery of reasons why I feel like I didn't have my best performance that day. So it's more about that than it is about the fact that there are other guys that were faster.
But even taking that into account, then, so you didn't sleep well the day before, you weren't feeling well, and you still managed to finish only 2 hours behind them on a 10.5-hour race, and you weren't feeling. And by the way, you had pneumonia or whatever it was. Yeah. So like,
I should have you just talking into my ear all the time. I feel better about myself.
Well, why? You gave all the excuses aside, which kind of even makes it more amazing. Why would you feel? I mean, here you set yourself this challenge, which is, okay, I'm 50. Let's see if I can still do something that's ultra endurance, just to see if it's possible. And you did it, and you did it within striking distance of people in peak condition, maybe 25 years younger. Why would you feel? I mean, I guess you would feel bad if you felt like. I don't know why you would feel bad.
I mean, it's like I said, it's not that I feel bad. It's just that I feel like I could have done better, right? And so to not acquit myself as well as I know that I'm capable of, just makes it feel like there's a little bit of unfinished business. That's all. It's not like I walk around staring at my toes or anything.
But like, do you think that when was the last big race you had done before then?
2011 was an Ultraman race, and that was a race that didn't go well, and I had to pull out in the middle of it. And I definitely didn't want my athletic career to end that way.
Right. So that's understandable. But there was then like a 3 or 4 year difference between these two races, which again,
5
those
years,
guys
yeah.
probably had been in a race the week before, for all we know. Why did you have to pull out of the 2011 race?
I started spitting up blood, and I had like a low-grade respiratory infection. So that race is a 3-day race. So after the first day, I knew something was wrong, and I started the second day thinking, well, I'll be fine. And then I realized, a couple hours into that second day, like I was going to have to pull out. Like I wasn't healthy. So it was, if you're going to be pushing your body that hard for that amount of time, even this, if you're just off in the slightest bit, like that compounds itself. So just even having like a low-grade respiratory infection that perhaps if you're just walking around, you wouldn't necessarily even notice, not something that would keep you home from work or anything like that, that can be, pretty debilitating in a race like that. So that just caught up to me, and that's why I didn't finish that race.
So I want to talk about health, because obviously you've managed to kind of almost reverse the direction your health was going to be able to achieve these incredible things. But also the fact that you're like, I'm going to hit 50 years old in, let's say it's December now. So in January, I'm going to hit 50. And for some reason, 40, I didn't mind. I was actually I was definitely happy with 30. I was okay with 40. I figured like 30 and 40 were sort of like, okay, now these are different notches where people take you seriously in different ways. But 50, I actually feel bad about.
You feel bad? Why do you feel bad about it?
I don't know. I mean, I have a kind of I'm certainly, I feel comfortable where I am in life at 50. I have no complaints, no problems. But I don't know. I feel like 50, I'm used for many years, for decades, I was the youngest person in the room. Now I'm like often the oldest person in the room.
Right.
And 50 sort of underlines that. Like, there's just, not only are you middle-aged, but you're kind of getting to be old at 50.
Well, also
I feel young. I feel youthful.
And you have youthful energy, and we're both playing a young man's game. Like being a podcaster and kind of being a personality on the internet and all the things that you do is typically the purview of people that are in their mid to late 20s, early 30s, right? Most of my 50-year-old friends, like they're not even like, they have no idea what I'm doing. Like it's just not part of their universe.
But maybe there's something wrong with us. Like why is it important for us?
But the thing is, I would imagine
why can't we relax?
You're probably spending a lot of time with a lot of people much younger than you.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Because I know that I do, and it makes me feel young, and I sort of look at them and I think I'm their age, and I have to remind myself like, oh man, like I could actually be that guy's dad.
No, I remember I was even talking to somebody who had just come from a conference that was organized by other people I knew, and he was a very young guy, and he was like, oh, it was like just a bunch of old people talking about investments. And I was like, well, let's do a young person version of it. And then I realized as I was saying it, the people who would organize that conference were 10 years younger than me.
Right.
So what was I talking about? I felt like foolish instantly. But, it's true. I hang out. I hang out with, look, we're hanging out. We're the similar age. But maybe we should relax more. Maybe you shouldn't be running around for 10 and a half hours in Stockholm.
I don't know what I should be doing. But I think, to your point about feeling weird about turning 50, it's natural. It's like it's a milestone that's going to trigger you to reflect on your path to date and what lies forward. So I think part of that is healthy. Maybe the feeling bad part about it is something to look at. I mean, I felt like great about turning 50 because I went through that at 40. Like I kind of had, because I was not happy with how I was living, now I'm really happy. I'm excited to get up every day and do what I do. And so like that milestone doesn't mean as much to me as it did when I turned 40 and I thought, what am I doing with my life? Because that was kind of the turning point in which I started to address all these things that have led me to here.
Well, and it's funny, like, I don't know, has your diet changed in the past? So I last saw you about a little over a year and a half ago. You look actually healthier now than then. I don't know, has your diet changed much? Well, and you're healthy then.
I think I've been training a little bit more because I just did this race in September. So I'm probably more fit than I was when you saw me last. My diet continues to get refined and improved. But, for the listeners out there, I changed my diet at 40 to a plant-based diet that like re-energized me and gave me this, resurgence of vitality that led me into becoming an athlete. Once again, I'd been an athlete in college, and then to go off and do all these things that we discussed. And to this day, I continue to tinker with it and refine it. I'm still 100% plant-based and, still 100% vegan. But during that 5-year period in which I didn't race, I was trying to figure out how to transition from being a corporate lawyer into, being someone like yourself who makes a living on the internet, like spreading a healthy message, and I've done that through books like yourself and through the podcast. But for me, it took a long time to create a stable revenue stream out of all of this. And so there were some pretty lean years, some pretty scary years in there. And so I wasn't racing during that period of time. So I continued to stay fit and go out and do stuff, but I wasn't like razor sharp like I had to be in September.
So let's talk about that time when you were 40 for a little bit. So you were a lawyer. What was going on? What was going on in your life?
So at 40, I was practicing law. I had been at big corporate law firms for many years. Went to law school at Cornell. I think we might have even overlapped and been there at the same time. And had spent time in a firm in San Francisco and then Los Angeles. Ultimately realized that, in the midst of all of that, to kind of further contextualize it, I had a struggle with drugs and alcohol that took me to some pretty dark places. I almost lost my entire career. It was very bad.
What was the?
Ended up.
It's a cliche to ask, but what was the lowest point of that? Like, I don't know if we ever discussed you almost losing your career.
The lowest point preceded me actually getting sober for a while, but the lowest point was I had a wedding in which I was purportedly getting married to a woman, and she didn't want to sign the marriage certificate, and that wedding ended on the honeymoon when I sent her home, and I've never seen her since. And that was like 1997 or something like that.
When she didn't want to, what did she say when she didn't want to sign the marriage certificate?
Oh, that's a 2-hour conversation in order to fully understand how this all unfolded. But suffice the sort of point behind it is she realized that she didn't want to get married to me. And although I was trying to stay sober at that time, she had this epiphany that she probably didn't want to be married to an alcoholic. And I certainly can't fault her for that. And I think she wasn't courageous enough to call off the wedding because it was like a train that had pulled out of the station and this thing was happening. And so her way of, I think by not signing the marriage certificate, she was trying to compel me to call it off for her because she didn't have the strength to do that. And then I allowed that to transpire unbeknownst to anybody who was attending this wedding and the 13 groomsmen that I had and everybody that I loved present for this ceremony, only to go on a honeymoon in which she barely spoke to me. And it was just the weirdest thing ever. And I ultimately ended up telling her that she needed to go home, and that wedding ended at that point. I mean, that marriage ended at that point. And that was although I was trying to stay sober at that time, when that happened, it was so emotionally devastating to me that like I had to drink. And
like that night after she left, you're still at the honeymoon location.
Yeah, I'm in Jamaica at a hotel room. The first thing I did was called room service and had them bring over a 12-pack of Red Stripe beer, and I just got annihilated.
Just by yourself?
Yeah.
And then did you go out?
And I was there for like a couple more days, and I just was drunk around the clock, and then had to like slink my way back home and try to put the pieces back together. And nobody that I knew what had happened. Like everybody thought that we were returning from this honeymoon happy.
So every single person you spoke to, you had to basically say, "I'm not married. We're not." And she left.
Exactly.
How did people react?
It was terrible. I mean, people they felt terrible for me, but it was devastating for me emotionally that something like that could happen. And so I had to drink because I didn't have the emotional capacity to weather that any other way at that time. And I was in so much pain over that it was I think it was like another year or so at least before I kind of hit my bottom and ended up in rehab.
So I don't even know how you would get the emotional capacity to deal with that. Like how does one deal with that in retrospect? Like how, other than of course not drinking, how could you have dealt with that?
I think
Assuming you were in love with her and you wanted to get married to her.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that I was in love with her at the time. And it's one of those things, James, where you look back on it and you're like, this is the best thing that ever happened to me, because it wasn't the right thing. And she probably was, in her own handicapped way, was making a good decision for herself and for me. Of course, I couldn't see that at that time. And I'm grateful to her now that this is how it played out, because it sort of set in motion all these things that allow me to be who I am now. But I think, a healthier way of dealing with that at the time would have been to go to therapy, to rely on the people that you love, to confide in the people that you trust and allow them in to help you. And I was somebody who walked around with this armor on thinking I can solve all my problems, through my self-will, and I don't need anybody's help, and just leave me alone. And I was very much an island in that regard.
And how old were you then?
30, 31.
Because I found that much later, when I was much older, I went through something similar, and we've even briefly talked about it offline, like when we last saw each other. But I found, like you, I was not very comfortable with asking people for help, but sometimes you just need to.
Mm-hmm.
That's, it's why humans live in a community, and the healthiest and longest living humans often live in strong communities. And I found once I did start asking people for help, like people who were my friends, or even people who wanted to be my friends, but I had not quite let in.
Mm-hmm.
People were very eager to help. It was like a gift I was giving them. It almost felt like that they could help me, because I had never really asked for this kind of emotional help before. And
it's scary to ask for help, and it's a very vulnerable feeling. And I think as men, at least speaking for myself, I was not comfortable with being vulnerable in that way. I was always trying to carry myself as somebody who could figure things out and had the answers. And I think, we all have some kind of psychic or emotional pain, and to repress that, or to pretend that it doesn't exist, or to act like it will just go away is ultimately not a great strategy. It will somehow manifest itself in errant behavior patterns or in other kinds of distress that will show up in your life later, eventually, like inevitably.
Well, and I think that those other kinds of behavior that show up afterwards, I'm just making the analogy to when something similar happened to me, is that it was almost like a big blind spot for me, in that I thought like, oh, I asked for help, people are helping me, and I'm done. I've dealt with this. It's great. And I didn't really realize the trauma of what had happened probably for another 1.5 to 2 years, that this entire time I'd been going through trauma, and for all I know, I still am, but at least then I was, and I wasn't aware of it. It was like this huge blind spot. And other people, I think, were sort of able to see it, but I wasn't able to see it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess what I'm leading to is that what you think might be a bottom, then later on, there's a much deeper and more meaningful rock bottom. And so you alluded to, like, 1.5 years later, there was some rock bottom for you. Like, what happened then?
Well, my drinking just continued to escalate, and the drama that I was inviting into my life, escalated accordingly. I got, 2 DUIs, like in a matter of weeks of each other. In Los Angeles, where, the cops don't mess around in LA if you get pulled over for DUI. And, the first one, I rear-ended an elderly woman at a busy intersection at like 3 a.m. and blew a .29, which is very drunk. And then a couple weeks later, driving down the wrong way down a one-way street in Beverly Hills, pulled over, .27. And the arresting officer on that occasion, when he arrested me, he sort of took my wallet, and he saw my business card, and he knew my boss, the senior partner at the law firm where I was working, who represented the Beverly Hills PD and the LAPD in all these excessive force cases. So he called my boss and said, I picked up one of your boys. So Monday morning, after I'd spent, a night in jail and kind of came back into the office, he called me into his office, and he knew the whole thing. He knew everything that was going on. So that was the first moment in which this private, secret life that I was living had suddenly become something that my employer was aware of, and that was very frightening for me. I was facing jail time. It's a long story, but I was able to avoid having to go to jail for that, which was like a miracle. And then just beyond that, it wasn't that there was a lot of crazy stories. It was just this progressive sense of desperation and loneliness that became unbearable, that the only solution for me was either to end my life or face the inevitable sort of process of trying to get sober, which I never thought I would be able to achieve.
And so you go in Monday morning, did your boss sort of start pushing you in that direction? Was he kind about it, or?
He was forthright and direct. He just said, look, your personal life is none of my business. I would prefer not to have to get into it. But, I got an interesting phone call the other day. I know what's going on. I know you're in deep shit. Here's a lawyer I want you to call, and I want you to take this seriously, and I don't want to hear about it anymore. So he basically said, take care of it. And as long as you take care of it, I'm cool. And I need to know, I was second chairing a big trial that was coming up that he was litigating. And he's like, I need to know that you're going to be able to show up for me. And that was it. And then he never said anything about it again. And of course, I hired this lawyer who was way out of my price range. I couldn't afford him. And went through the legal process of trying to unravel that knot. And again, these things didn't all take place in rapid fire. This played out over a couple of years.
So that's stressful.
Yeah, it was stressful. It was stressful. It was just I just felt very alone. And again, it goes back to that kind of sensibility of not wanting to ask for help. And I was so ashamed of my behavior because James, like yourself, I was somebody who as a young person was kind of heralded as somebody with a lot of promise. I got into all these great colleges. I got to go to a great college. I got into a great law school. I could get the good job. I could do all these things. And people were always I shouldered this sense of pressure and expectation that I would be this certain kind of person. And I was investing a lot of time and energy, all of my time and energy in trying to live up to that. And what I wasn't aware of at the time and what a ton of therapy and sobriety have showed me is that I was trying to force this round peg into a square hole for most of my life because I never took the time to stop and say, well, let's get off this, train to the American dream and really reflect on, who you are and what do you want to express in your life. That was just never part of the conversation or the equation for me. And I think on some level, I don't know why I'm an alcoholic. I just know that I am, but I have to imagine that kind of dissonance contributed to a lot of my drinking and using because I had so much discomfort about how I was living my life, and that was a way to numb or ease that pain. Because the original question you had was what was going on at 40. So I was having this crazy existential crisis, even though I got sober at 31. At 40, I'm jumping ahead, but after I got out of rehab, it was all about repairing this broken life and just getting back on track and riding that train to the American dream without that self-reflection.
Because then the rehab, I guess, sobers you up right then. But I know many people who go to rehab and then they're okay for a few months, then they're back in rehab, then they're okay for a few months. So there's the rehab, which sobers you up right then, and then you have to kind of deal with what was causing the hole that you were trying to fill. So when did you, it's a big leap. Like you say, you were on this train to the American dream. It's hard to jump off a moving train.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, you had already invested both psychologically and financially and physically so much into your career. It's hard to say to yourself, okay, I'm going to jump off this train and land on my 2 feet
Mm-hmm.
and walk in a different direction. How did you decide, okay, I'm walking in and quitting my job today?
It was like a 12-year process of how this kind of unfolded. But essentially what happened was, yes, you're exactly right. You get out of rehab, what a lot of people don't realize who aren't familiar with addiction and alcoholism is that the drugs and the alcohol are the solution to the problem. They're not the problem until later. Initially, they're the solution. And so when you remove those, yes, you have deleted that aspect of your behavior that's causing problems, but you're left with all of these emotions that and all of this sort of emotional immaturity that then needs to get tended to. And if you don't tend to it, you're either going to relapse or you're going to start doing other crazy stuff that's going to screw up your life. So for me, I immersed myself in the recovery community in Los Angeles, and sobriety became my number one priority. And with that, I started to put the pieces back together in my life and to the point where I could, be looked at as a responsible member of society, and was able to, create bonds with my family again and my friends and all of that. And that took like a good 10 years.
Why were the bonds with your family?
Well, at the end, they were done with me. They were like, if you want to get sober, call us. But until then, like, we don't want to hear from you.
Because were there negative things?
No, it was just, they were just so terrified, because they knew how bad the problem was. And they couldn't understand why I couldn't or wouldn't get sober.
And so, did you immerse yourself in the sober community partly as a legal strategy to avoid the jail time for DUIs?
No, that had been sorted out. It wasn't. No, it was just I knew that I needed to learn. I needed tools to live. Like I needed a whole new toolbox for how to approach my life. A, to stay sober, and B, to grow into the emotionally mature person that I felt like I could be. Right, and so 12 Steps, has taught me that. And I've learned tools in that program that I use every single day in every aspect of my life.
Like what we'll use today?
Today, practicing gratitude, doing a gratitude list every day, understanding that, I'm not in control. I'm not in control of James Altucher and the questions that he's going to ask me. I'm not in control of people, places, and things. Understanding that there is a God of my own design and a power greater than myself that I can turn my emotional discontentedness and problems over to.
What does it mean, God of your own design?
Well, 12 Step they say it's a spiritual program. It's not a religious program, but it is essentially faith-based. And with that, one of the kind of primers is that you come to understand that there's a power greater than yourself, and you get to decide what that is. It could just be like if you don't believe in God, then you can come to an understanding that the 20 or 50 or 100 people in that meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous has more answers about how to stay sober than you do because of their collective experience, right? So that would be a power greater than yourself. You get to decide that for yourself. But I remember when I was in rehab, one of the first things one of the counselors said to me was, Rich, are you a human being having a spiritual experience, or are you a spiritual being having a human experience? And I was like, I don't fucking understand that question. Like, can you repeat that? Like, I still, and I think about that almost every single day, but I do believe that we're all spiritual beings having a human experience, that there are lots of things going on around us that we can't understand and perhaps could never understand because of the size of our brains not being large enough or whatever it is. And trusting in that and kind of getting to this place of surrender versus self-will has been one of the most powerful and helpful tools that has guided my life.
And if you think about it, it's a very complicated tool because on the one hand, you're you and you want to be the best you, and that's important. And you wake up thinking, what can I do today to improve myself, improve the world, improve my family and relationships? So there's a significance to your decisions, but at the same time, it's also coming to grips with the kind of insignificance of you have that small brain, you can't control everything, you can't know everything, you can't do everything you could possibly want to do. Understanding that in 100 years, no one's going to remember who you are. So it's kind of this dichotomy that we have to live with each day, I think, and both feel good. Like surrendering to that notion of insignificance feels good, but also doing something significant feels good.
Right. It's that adage of focusing on the things that you can control and relinquishing the things that you can't. And, I know for myself and probably for a lot of your listeners, the idea of surrender is like anathema, right? You have a lot of type A personality people that listen to this show, entrepreneurs and the like. And that was the case with myself as well. Like my whole life, looking back on it, I thought that everything that I had achieved, whether it was getting into Stanford or becoming this swimmer at Stanford or getting into law school or getting whatever job that I got, was a result of not divine providence, but because of my work ethic. Like I never considered myself to be the smartest or the most talented athletically or academically, but I knew how to work really hard, and I knew I could bridge that talent deficit gap by going the extra mile. And I'd always prided myself on that, like, capacious ability to like outwork the next person. And so this was my rule book, like just outwork the next guy, show up earlier, work later, swim more miles, whatever it is. And I was going to take that recipe, to the grave and apply that to everything in my life. And I realized with alcoholism, that doesn't work. Like I tried to solve it my own way without 12-step or letting anybody in or telling anybody what was going on or asking for help. And the more I relied on my self-will with respect to that problem, the deeper I dug that hole. And so I was forced through pain into a place of submission where I had no other choice than to surrender, than to let go. And at that time, I equated that with failure. Surrender is failure. You're waving the white flag, you're giving up. Like that's not part of my composition. That's not part of my DNA. But what I've come to realize and really embrace is that it takes strength to surrender, and that by being in that place of surrender, like that doesn't mean you're lazy or you don't do work, but by being in that place of surrender, you can really embody a sense of humility that removes the negative aspects of the ego and allows you to show up not just for yourself, but for other people in the best way possible.
Let's stop to take a quick break. We'll be right back. I would say doing a podcast is the activity that I've enjoyed most in these past few years. Please take a moment to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or wherever it is you get your podcasts. It will only take a second, but it will help other people discover the podcast, and it will really show people in general that this is a quality show and that it's worth listening to. You can also check out the show notes at jamesaltucher.com/podcast. And also, if you want to get my blog updates and other updates that I do, sign up for the newsletter at jamesaltucher.com. Thanks again. I really appreciate you guys. I feel there's obviously nuances to the word surrender, right? So what does it mean what do you feel internally when there's a situation you're encountering and you're saying like, you know what, the best strategy here, or maybe you don't think of it so tactically, but this is a point where I'm surrendering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe you're in a conflict with somebody and you have that impulse, like you want to fire off that email and resolve it because it makes you so uncomfortable, or I need to call this other person, I need to address it. And sometimes the solution is to do nothing, to wait, to pause when agitated, and to revisit it in 24 hours. And in a certain respect, I think that's like a micro example of surrender.
But I think that probably happens every day.
Yeah, of course. And that's also just practicing mindfulness too. I think in a more macro sense, when I look at my life, I'm not sitting here with you doing a podcast and getting to travel all over the world and give talks and sell books and doing all that. Like I'm clear enough now to realize like that is not the result of my ego and my self-will, that there is something else at play that has provided me with these amazing opportunities in my life. And that makes room for me for gratitude. Like I understand and I believe that there's more going on.
So when did that happen? So obviously when you were a lawyer, you had a goal, which was I'm going to be a bigger and bigger lawyer. I'm going to make more and more money. I'm going to make partner and senior partner. Or maybe you had a goal, you were going to eventually be the chief legal officer for some big company and make a lot of money that way. And you kind of at some point decided, okay, it's definitely not going to happen. I'm going to quit this and do something else. Mm-hmm. Like what was that moment?
Well, it happened in a couple stages. I mean, when I got out of rehab, I went back to the law firm where I was working. And I knew, I developed enough awareness to understand that I was pursuing the wrong career path. But I was too afraid of stepping outside of it because I had no idea what else I would do with my life. So I went back and worked at this law firm for like a year. And, is a high-powered place, Century City law firm, the whole thing, working on crazy cases. I worked with like Robert Shapiro, the OJ lawyer. I was second chairing a trial with him, like doing some interesting stuff for that occupation. But just looking around at all the partners, I just didn't aspire to have any of their lives. Like some of them loved it, and that's great. And I just realized like there's no way that I could will myself into that place of loving it the way that these people do. And
I think that, by the way, that's a good test of things. If all the people who are kind of superior to you, whether you're at a graduate school and these are professors, or you're at a job and these are your bosses, or you're in an industry, and these are the heroes of the industry. If you don't actually want to be them, it's probably not going to be the case that you could do enough different things. If you stay in the same industry and job, it's probably not going to be the case that you could veer that much further away from the heroes of that industry.
And you're probably never going to be very good at it.
That's
right?
probably true,
If
because
you don't
those are
love
the
it.
best.
Yeah. So having that awareness or that understanding is different from doing anything about it. Like I said, I'd been on this train for so long, and the idea that I would step off and do something else, like I just was so out of my programming. Like my whole life, I was just in that lane, you know?
How could you even entertain the thought of doing something else? That's what I want to know.
I know, but I always hear stories of like you just had Dennis Woodside on your podcast, and as we were saying before the podcast, like I've known that guy for a long time. Like we were summer associates at a law firm when we were young, and he's a guy who could look around and say, okay, I could do this, but I see more opportunity over here, and I'm just going to move, and didn't seem to have any hesitation or like emotional baggage around it.
It wasn't like he was jumping off the train. The train was. He got on a connecting train.
Yeah, I guess
he's like the legal guy or the COO of Dropbox.
Right.
So that's more of a connecting train than jumping off the train.
Yeah, I mean, for me, here's how it played out. Like I literally reached the point where I was so burned out and incapable of doing this work. It was so at odds with this person that I was kind of growing into that one day I was like, I was staring at my computer, and all I had to do was type a confirming letter, like, okay, this deposition's going to be on this date, blah, blah, blah. I couldn't do it. I was like, I can't even hit the keyboard with my finger. Like, I'm done. And I went into my boss's office, the same boss who, had found out about the DUIs and also was very supportive when I went to rehab. Like, he kind of had my back. Like, he's a super hard-nosed, like, very tenacious litigator, but he always kind of protected me because I was kind of his boy. And I just said, look, I got to quit. Like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't do the job. Like, I don't even feel right about you paying me to do this because you're not getting any value out of me. And I don't have a plan. I'm not going across the street for more money. Like, I don't even know what I'm going to do, but I just know I just can't keep showing up here anymore.
If you were to give advice now to someone in that position who has no idea what to do next, what would you say?
I mean, I wouldn't recommend that they do what I did. I just felt like there was no other option for me. And I literally had zero plan, and I had enough money to last me maybe 2 months. That was it. And no idea what would follow. Like, I thought maybe I'll just go home and live with my mom. Like, I literally didn't know what to do. And so I don't know that's advice I would give to somebody else, but I do think that there is something powerful about taking a leap of faith on some level. I think it would be advisable to have a bit of a plan or a sensibility about what you're going to do once you take that leap, which I did not have. But I think, trying to have your foot in one world and in the other and hoping for the best that both are going to work out, in my experience, I don't think is a great strategy either. I think on some level, you have to take a leap of faith, whether it's micro or macro. And in my case, it was very macro, and it was scary. But what happened in the wake of that was suddenly, a week later, my phone rang with this screenwriter or this independent film producer who needed me to look at a contract. And before I knew it, I was kind of cobbled together this solo law firm practice. And so I did that in various capacities for a number of years. So I kind of was de-escalating out of being a lawyer without totally cutting the cord, but going from the big corporate job into a more self-styled situation in which I had more control over my time, soothed that wound and allowed me to perpetuate the continuation of being a lawyer without completely, cutting that off completely. And maybe I protracted how long I was a lawyer.
Because that you could have done forever. Like that sounds like you make your own hours.
And I might have. And when I had that, epiphany at 40 in the staircase incident and began training for these races, I was still practicing law as a solo practitioner. I wasn't making very much money, and I was becoming less and less interested in it. But it allowed me domain over how I spent my time to invest myself in other things that were becoming more interesting to me.
Like what?
Like the training for these races, and the amount of time that took. Like I would go out on these like 8-9 hour training bike rides. and on a weekday, and my phone would ring and it would be like, I have to like pull over and like negotiate a deal. And I'd think like, hey, these guys are in Beverly Hills or at a studio. Like if they had any idea what I was doing right now, and this was before it was kind of acceptable for everybody to be a freelancer. So it took a long time for me to kind of own, this other life that I was starting to, pursue.
But then, it's such a pleasure to switch gradually, whether it's gradually or fast or whatever, into things that you love doing. So here, instead of being all day in the office, suddenly you're able to make a living. You're still doing the work that you were trained for, but you're on a bicycle 8 hours a day or doing some kind of training. Like that must have felt good.
Yeah, it definitely felt good.
Because your body's going to
Definitely
feel
did.
better, and your mind was probably like, oh, I get to do this.
Yeah, it was a relief because it wasn't just, first of all, I wasn't riding 8 hours on my bike every day, but I was starting to train every day. And because I could control my time, I could designate when to do that every day. And that meant, I'd work really late at night sometimes or work super early in the morning. But it wasn't just that I was like doing this physical training. Like it was reconnecting with something that really made me happy. It made me happy as a kid. Like I'd forgotten I was a swimmer as a child and how much joy that brought into my life. And as an adult growing older, it's sort of like, well, that's what kids do. Now you have to do this. You got to ride elevators every day and like wear suits and stuff. And you can't really embrace that aspect of what made you happy as a younger person. And so I was revisiting that, and it really reconnected me with a big part of like who I am. So it was self-discovery, but it was also like a journey backwards into connecting with, kind of who I am really as a person.
I always tell people, try to list the things you were interested in from ages 6 to 14, because there's a lot of clues in there as to what you want to do. Because there is a big disconnect once you go to college. Like, okay, now I've got to start doing this. I can't be Superman, and I love Superman comics then. But sometimes things age, so like maybe you can't be a superhero because that's impossible, but maybe you could tell stories or draw comics or be an athlete or whatever. Like
I think it's great advice.
There's a lot of ways things age that we don't think about until we put it down on paper and start thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're sort of taught that, those are the purview of juveniles, But in truth, if it makes you happy, it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks about it. My recommendation is always that you find some way to embrace those things. Even if they seem silly or you're embarrassed to admit it out loud, it doesn't mean that you're going to walk out of your job and pursue it as a full-time career, but to find ways to build that into your daily existence, I think is really powerful.
And so talk about the staircase incident. Even though I find we've talked about this before, but we didn't really have this build-up to it before. So it puts it in a different context.
Right. So what happened was from 31 to 40, I'm on this, lawyer track that we were talking about, trying to rebuild my life, repair the wreckage of my past, become successful. And by the time I'm 39, 40, I'd achieved these things. Like I met my wife, who and we built this amazing home that we still live in today. I had a fancy sports car in the driveway. I had like all the cool stuff. Like if you were on the outside looking in, you're like, this guy's got like a really good life. And on paper, I did. But on the inside, I felt like I was dying, like I was depressed. I was unenthusiastic about my life because I knew I was in a career that was ill-suited to me, but I just couldn't see my way out of it. And what I only now kind of really understand in retrospect is that despite being very diligent in my sobriety and maintaining that, I had transferred a lot of my addictive alcoholic tendencies onto like lifestyle habits and food habits. So I was a total junk food addict, 3 times a day, the drive-throughs and the Chinese food at the law firm and all that kind of stuff, not exercising, not taking care of myself, working ridiculous hours, not sleeping, just not taking care of myself. So I have this existential crisis on the one hand, and I have this brewing kind of like poor health. And both of these things are kind of percolating. And
are they connected, you think? Like if you're having the existential crisis, are you going to eat like crap?
Yeah, of course. of course, like I don't feel good about myself. I'm not happy in my life. I'm not happy with the career that I'm pursuing. I'm confused about what's next. I'm uncomfortable in my own skin. So what do? Like, I'll go to McDonald's and just numb that out. Like you can use food just like you use alcohol. And that was something that took me a long time to really realize about my own behavior. So I can't drink anymore. I can't do drugs. Well, yeah, but I can go eat French fries or I can eat pie or whatever.
Were you overweight?
Yeah, so I was about 50 pounds overweight.
Do you have a picture?
I do. I can show you afterwards. I was never like morbidly obese guy. But yeah, like I look like a hefty guy who like works in a law firm and is riding elevators up and down, and not going running or anything like that. And shortly before my 40th birthday, this existential crisis and this sort of poor health collided in this perfect storm where I was walking up a simple flight of stairs to go to bed late one night after a long day at work. And I had to stop. Like I had to stop and take a breather, like up a simple flight of stairs. I was like wheezing, sweat on my brow, like buckled over, and a really distinct like tightness in the center of my chest. And it really scared me. I thought, I'm 39, like I shouldn't have chest pains. I still thought of myself as that like Stanford swimmer, even though I didn't look anything like that anymore, which is kind of how denial works. And heart disease runs in my family. My grandfather had been a champion swimmer in the 1920s and 1930s, died of a heart attack at a very young age, despite like never smoking or never being overweight. And my mom was always like, you got to eat right. You got to watch out. Like this happens in our family. And it's like blah, blah, blah when you're young. But, in that moment, it finally all kind of like dawned on me. And I realized like, I need to change how I'm living. Like I am not okay with this. And it was a very specific, distinct episode that in many ways is very reminiscent of the day I decided to go to rehab. It was like a bottom, where suddenly your denial is snapped and you have a willingness to take a different tack and ask others for help and kind of surrender. It was another kind of surrender to a different kind of problem.
And so how did you ask for help and how did you surrender at this point? Because I think this is where this whole new chapter of your life started.
Mm-hmm. So the first thing I did is I asked Julie to help me because my wife, she wasn't 100% plant-based at the time, but she's super healthy and always reading spiritual books and like trying to better herself. And, that was always her
Was that a
trip.
problem when you were first kind of getting together? And I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, it's good.
Well, was that a problem when you were first starting to get together and you kind of had differing beliefs, but there must have been some values that were overlapping for you to be kind of attracted and willing to get married and so on?
Yeah, we're very different, but I was attracted to that aspect of her character. I mean, we met in a yoga class. Like when I got out of rehab, I started going to yoga. I needed to like meet new friends and have a new community, and she was part of that community. That's where we met. So, in that context, I'm obviously attracted or drawn to people that are trying to expand themselves in certain ways. And this was yoga in 1998. So it's a little bit different than it is now. Like I was one of the only guys in the class.
And in LA.
And which is yeah,
kind of the forefront of
it was
every
a thing.
possible belief system.
Yeah, it was a thing. I was like, this is where you go to meet beautiful women. I can't go to bars anymore, so I'll go to yoga class. But yeah, so Julie was very much like interested in all things spiritual, and was very invested in expanding her awareness and her consciousness and was always trying new things. And I found that to be like curious and interesting, like, 'cause it was so different than my logic-based, rational approach to life. But that rehab experience and sobriety was opening me up in certain ways. And it was, and like I felt like I wanted to explore that aspect of myself. And she was somebody who was kind of further down that path. And, to this day, she's somebody who challenges me on a lot of my, beliefs and proclivities. So I relish that aspect of her. Although sometimes I'm like, come on, like that's too much, like I can't go there with you. And we joke about it. I mean, we have a healthy relationship around it. But I think she was like a wild animal to me because she was coming from a different planet from what I was used to.
So what you're kind of saying though, it's okay to have differing belief systems, but that enough open-mindedness on both sides and enough overlap that you could kind of ride the wave when the other one is going in a slightly different direction?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I said, my wife and I are very different. I think we share a core set of values around how we want to live our lives. And we challenge each other as much as she challenges me. I challenge her, and through that process, we're able to grow. And we fight and disagree all the time. It's not about like never fighting, but we have a healthy toolbox for how we kind of navigate conflict. And we've been together like 19 years at this point.
So basically, you asked her for help.
Mhm.
She was eating healthier than you at the time. She maybe had more of kind of this notion of surrender at the time. What direction did your eating habits go in? I remember actually you told me something very interesting, which I remember. This was like 3 years ago. We were talking about this because we were talking about your move from one type of diet to a plant-based diet or a vegan sort of diet. I forget which stage, which direction it was, but you said how whatever you eat, the first few weeks when you change diets is extremely difficult because whatever you were eating leaves bacteria behind in your gut. And it's that bacteria that has the cravings for what you were eating. So those McDonald's French fries were leaving bacteria in your gut on their way through the system, and they're still going to crave more French fries. So it's those first 2 or 3 weeks after you stop eating French fries and you're going towards something more healthy, you feel incredible cravings. Like it's painful, the cravings you feel. And I think that's probably why most changes in diet don't work.
Yeah, I think that's actually absolutely right. I mean, what happens is, your gut flora, your microbiome is crucial to optimal health, and it's very interesting. They're learning, the studies and the science that's going into this right now is mind blowing. But they're learning so much about the impact of your gut flora, the quality of your gut flora, on all manner of different aspects of health, including the foods that we crave. So like you said, if you're seeding your microbiome with the microorganisms that live and thrive on lousy foods, fatty foods, sugary foods, and you're populating that ecology with that, quote unquote, like unhealthy gut flora. And so what happens is that gut flora needs more of that unhealthy food to live. That's what it thrives on. That's what it lives on. And they're figuring out that somehow there's some mechanism by which the gut flora can trigger your nervous system to send signals to your brain to crave those specific foods, which is insane.
Well, there's more serotonin in the gut than in the brain. And serotonin is totally linked to depression and anxiety and all of these things. So it's probably somewhat connected to that. Like if your serotonin's like going crazy and doesn't want to feed your brain, then you're going to be depressed immediately.
Right. Yeah, it's really amazing, and you should have a microbiome expert on your podcast to speak more intelligently about these matters than myself. But I can speak from direct experience, which is if I'm eating lousy food, then suddenly I start craving those lousy foods. And when you start eating healthy foods, you will have those pangs and cravings for the unhealthy food until you can kind of weather that storm, whether it's 7 or 10 days or 14 days, to get past it as you repopulate your gut biome with a different kind of microorganism, the kind that lives and thrives on the healthy foods that you're eating. And so my experience is that now I crave healthy foods, which is crazy.
Like what's your breakfast?
I usually start the day with a smoothie that's mostly dark leafy greens like spinach and kale. If I'm working out that day, maybe half a beet, lots of berries, blackberries, blueberries, maybe a banana, and then some crazy superfoods and things like hemp seeds and spirulina or chlorella and
for breakfast.
For breakfast, yeah, and I'll just drink that. Like it's super high in fiber.
When you drink it, don't you lose some of the fiber?
Not if you blend it. If you juice it, that extracts the fiber. So juicing and blending are different. If you blend it, all of the fiber is still in there. And it's very easily assimilated because essentially the blending process is kind of pre-digesting it for you. It's breaking it down so that when you drink it, it can provide you with energy relatively immediately without your body having to do a lot of work to digest the foods first. if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So you start doing this. I guess you got through obviously the 7 to 10 day period.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I did was like a 7-day crazy juice fast cleanse thing, which was kind of like detox for food for me. Like I felt like I needed to do something really crazy and severe to like, wipe the, like tabula rasa, wipe the slate clean and begin anew, with my relationship with food. Much like, going to rehab and get rid of the, you got to detox off the drugs and alcohol before you can move forward.
And so you did that. You started eating healthier, and then, boom. How did you change directions?
Yeah. So what happened was for the next 6 months after that 1 week, sort of quote unquote like detoxing, cleansing thing, whatever you want to call it, I felt amazing after that 7-day period. I couldn't believe how good I felt, like from feeling so terrible. Literally a week
juices
before.
In the morning on dark leafy greens or whatever it was. Lunch. What was the example?
I mean, this was. I'd have to remember. I can't remember specifically. I mean, it was a pretty kind of involved protocol. It wasn't a starvation thing, but it was essentially fruit and vegetable juices and some broths, but progressively weaning yourself off food, a couple days with no solid food whatsoever, and then kind of easing your way back into it. But I'd never gone a single day in my entire life without eating solid food. So this was like uncharted territory for me. And there were a couple days where I felt terrible and had no energy and was like lying on a couch.
Were you able to go into work?
There was 2 days where I didn't work at all. The third day, the fog started to lift a little bit. Fourth and fifth day started to feel really good. By the seventh day, I felt incredible. Yeah. And I was like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know the science behind this whatsoever. I'm not sure I buy into this idea of detoxing. Like, what exactly am I detoxing off? What are these toxins that are being removed? Like, it didn't matter. Like, it goes back to kind of that surrender thing. Like, I just needed to do something different and stop asking questions. And so I just embarked on this experiment. All I know is that on that seventh day, I felt incredible. And then I wanted to find a way to eat that would allow me to feel that good all the time. And then I went and tried a whole bunch of different things without very much success before finally settling on attempting a 100% plant-based diet, which was like the thing that I hadn't tried because it just seemed so crazy and restrictive. Like I was not like...
And difficult.
Yeah, it seemed like, well, that's like what's left to eat, right? Like it sounds terrible. But I tried all these other things and I wasn't having much success. And I thought, well, this is the one thing I haven't tried yet. And I didn't expect it to be any different. Like I didn't have high expectations that I would feel any different. Or
what's the difference between a plant-based diet and a vegan diet?
Plant-based diet generally refers only to nutrition. You're eating only plants, nothing with a face, nothing with a mother, plant foods. It typically gets extrapolated into meaning something called a whole food plant-based diet, which means plant foods and no processed foods, like not a lot of, like the Oreos and chips and things like that. But plant-based refers specifically to food, whereas vegan is more of a advocacy or a political point of view that is applicable to your perspective on the treatment of animals, how animal products are used in everything from, clothing to consumer products and the like. So vegan is more of an all-encompassing perspective that has more of a political component to it.
But the food-wise, it's kind of similar.
Similar, yeah. Plant-based usually means like eating healthy plants, whereas vegan, if you're somebody who's an animal rights activist and is eschewing animal products but don't care about health and you're eating Oreos and potato chips all day long, like I guess that's plant-based, but that's not really plant-based. Is more considered to be like healthy. You know what I mean? You're almost vegan. Okay, good.
My daughter has become very plant-based and I think vegan.
What motivated her?
YouTube videos.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of young YouTubers. She always wanted to eat healthy, and I think so she would search for that on YouTube. And then there's a lot of YouTubers who are essentially plant-based or healthy eating and have videos every day describing what it means to them, and she kind of follows that.
That's cool. That's exciting. Are you supportive?
Oh, yeah, very much so.
Okay.
So whenever she comes into town, depending on where I am living in town, she maps out all the vegan and plant-based restaurants, and we have to try every single one of them while she's in town.
Well, there's so many here in New York. It's so easy to do it here.
Yeah. So a lot in LA too.
Yeah, for sure.
More in LA. I think better ones in LA than in New York.
Yeah, but LA, like, they're spread out. Like,
Yeah.
here, they're everywhere you go. I don't know. I love coming here. It's so easy to
like last time you were here, you, me, and Julie, your wife, we ate at Pure Foods and Wine, which no longer exists.
I know.
What do you like in New York now?
Let's see. The place that I haven't been to yet that I want to go to tomorrow is Orchard Grocer.
Where is
They
that?
have like amazing bagels, plant-based, down on Orchard Street. Where's that? Lower East Side?
Yeah. Have you been to Nick's?
I haven't been there, no.
Oh, it's so good.
Nick's, where's that?
It's on University Ave near Union Square. It's like 12th and University Ave.
Oh, really?
That's like my favorite restaurant in
I'm
town.
going to try that out. I usually go to Peace Food, which is right there as well.
So
which is pretty good.
So I'm on the Upper West Side now, and there's a Peace Food there, which my daughter just took me to the other day, and it was excellent.
Yeah, it's good, right?
Yeah.
And you're probably near Candle also.
Yeah,
Candle
we went to
Cafe.
Candle the day after,
Right.
and it was excellent.
Yeah, it's good. There's so many good places. Beyond Sushi, plant-based sushi here in New York, everywhere you go.
Yeah, I've been to Beyond Sushi.
Mm-hmm.
So that's more like not quite Midtown, but in the 20s, I think.
I think there's
I've ordered there.
They have a couple of them around town.
Yeah. We were going to order. It was just a little too far for us the last time my daughter was in town because I live in different places.
Yeah, I know.
So
we're going to talk about that on my podcast.
So you started eating this way, and then my question the last time, which I can ask the same thing, is I notice for myself when I'm eating healthy, sometimes it's hard for me to keep my energy level up because I'm not doing it right somehow. I think I'm either eating too little or I'm missing some nutrient. I don't know what the story is.
Well, in order to answer that, I'd have to really look at what it is you're eating. But I think a common mistake that a lot of people make when they go plant-based, and just to, we skipped over the part, like when I did adopt a plant-based diet, like I had that experience of feeling amazing like I did on that 7th day of the juice cleanse. And that was kind of an epiphany moment that got me invested in exploring how to do this right. And I've been plant-based now for 11 years. And it's been incredible, and I love everything about it. But I get that question a lot from people, and I think there's a misconception. Like if you're plant-based, like, oh, you're just eating salad all the time, or you're eating like, you're kind of grazing like a small animal or something like that, chewing grass out of the yard. And that's not what my diet looks like. And so I think a lot of people are not getting enough calories. They're like, I'm eating healthy. I had a salad. Well, it's like I train 20, 25 hours a week. Like I eat a ton of food, and I need a lot of food. And if I don't eat enough food, I'm going to feel weak also. So I think it's less likely that it has something to do with you missing out on nutrients. If anything, if you're eating plant-based foods close to their natural state, you're probably getting a higher, more concentrated dose of nutrients than you are perhaps lacking in anything.
Yeah, I think my problem is I'm probably not eating enough. So I'll have a day like today where I did a podcast in the morning. I'm going to do a podcast with you. I have an event later. So ultimately today I'm going to eat 2 meals instead of 3.
Mm-hmm.
And my breakfast is always kind of small. And then my dinner will be a little bigger, but not that much bigger because I don't like to eat too much before I sleep. So I just won't eat enough food to get me through the day.
Right. So and if you were to go get a cheeseburger, though, that would be like a ton of calories, and it would sit in your stomach, and
Yeah,
you'd
I'd feel sick.
awful.
Yeah.
You'd feel terrible.
So I can't. I'm in this weird state, just where I've been doing this for a while. So now I can't eat the normal level of calories, but I'm not getting enough calories to have energy, like the same level of energy through the day.
Well, there's plenty of solutions to that. One of the things that I do when I am at home, if I make that smoothie, like I make a huge thing of it, and I'll have 1 glass of it, and I can put the rest in a thermos and take it with me and sip on it throughout the day, and it keeps my energy levels really high. I also, there's plenty of days where I don't really, it's not like, oh, I eat 3 meals. I just sort of graze throughout the day, and I try to always have healthy options within arm's reach, whether that's like bananas or almonds or just, some nuts, some healthy snacks. So I'm always kind of like eating a little bit all the time, as opposed to like, okay, it's lunchtime, we're taking a break and we're going to go sit and eat this huge meal, and then I'm going to feel tired afterwards.
Yeah, but you probably will also work out more than I do. So I'm still trying to find that balance. Now I live on the 6th floor of my building. So I'll walk up the stairs instead of taking the elevator. But that's the extent of my daily workout.
Yeah, well, we could work on that aspect of your daily routine.
So, but yeah, I've been running into this problem lately more and more.
Well, we could offline. You can tell me exactly what you're eating, and I can hopefully steer you in a positive direction. I think it's probably very easily solved.
Because then you had that you went on this diet, and then suddenly you had the energy to go out there and run, 10 miles or whatever. What was the first run you did after you started doing all this?
Again, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. I mean, I'd been a swimmer in college, so I had a background as an athlete, and then all these years go by where I'm not physically active. I go on this plant-based jaunt. I'm starting to feel great again. And suddenly I had this desire to move my body once again, which was great because it was an impulse that hadn't visited me in a very long time. And it began very casually, James. Like, I went back to the pool for like the first time in forever and like went for a swim and pulled an old dusty pair of running shoes out of the closet and like went out for a 1 mile jog. Like it was very low key. It wasn't like I'm going to be an athlete again. That was not it at all. It was just reconnecting with my body in a physical way, realizing that brought some happiness into my life, that was counteracting this depressive state that I was in. And that kind of launched me into like, well, wouldn't it be great to like lose this belly fat and have good energy so I can have fun with my kids? Like that's really what it was about. But each week that went by, like I was losing the weight like without really all that much effort. Like I just was feeling better and better and better, and I felt like I was getting stronger really quickly. And then it was about 3 or 4 months in to this process where I went out for a run, and at that point I don't think I'd run longer than 6 or 7 miles, and I had this moment where I was like in the zone and I just felt like I could run all day. And I put in like 24 miles on a trail that day, which was like the longest I'd ever run in my life. And believe me, I was like as flabbergasted and as amazed as you look right now, because I didn't think that I could do anything like that. And I just remember thinking either I just unlocked a crazy dormant gene that I didn't know that I had, or there's really something about these lifestyle habits that I've adopted that are putting me on a different trajectory.
But I like how you don't have to know the answer to that question because you do it, because you did it.
Yeah, I did it. Like I was like, well, I'm just going to continue to pull this thread, and see where it goes. And I think what it did, and I don't know that I was consciously aware of this at the time, what that singular experience did for me was it helped me to reflect on the ceiling that we kind of all put on ourselves, like about what our potential is or what we're capable of. Because yes, it was many months of, struggling with these diet things and trying to figure it out and starting to get fit again. And, if you read an article about me on the internet, it looks like it all happened overnight, and that's not how it happened, but it was in a relatively compressed period of time. And I think that made me think like, God, in such a short period of time, like I feel so different. My body feels different. I look different. I'm doing things differently. What other areas of my life am I not really looking at in the same way? Like where am I capping myself, or where are there other hidden pockets of potential that I could explore? And I think that's what ultimately attracted me into these doing these crazy races, because they're like a template for exploring potential, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, because these events are so mental. Like they do require so much of your emotional and mental capabilities as much as physical.
Sure. And, I don't think we've ever talked about this, which is you call them races. And I think the impressive part always to me is that you did them because, after all that you had been through. But were they like races where there was a winner? Did you win a race?
Yeah, the Ultraman race is a world championship event, and there's a winner every year. It's limited to just 35 competitors from all around the world. It's an invitation-only event. And
how do you get invited?
I just used my lawyerly skills for I can't believe they let me participate in 2008, which is the first time I did it, because I had no resume that should have legitimized my entry. But I was able to make that happen somehow. And that first year, I did. I just wanted to finish, and I did, and I ended up doing better than I thought that I could, and I certainly better than I think anybody else thought that I could. And then the following year, 2009, I went into it thinking like I want to be competitive and see what I can do. And I actually was winning that race after the first day's stage. I had a 10-minute lead on anybody else in the field. I crashed my bike on the second day, which took me out of podium contention, and I was lucky to even finish that race, but I ended up 6th in that. And that was when I was 43. So, I was able to be somewhat competitive in that arena for a period of time.
And then, because that's amazing, even crashing the bike and still ending up 6th. And then you're able to, I always like this phrase, process is art. So you're able to kind of take the process of all this and you wrote books about your experience, you documented it, and that's really what kind of brought you to this kind of completely new career.
Yeah, that's
people
exactly
know
right.
you now as this Ultraman, Ironman athlete and not as a lawyer.
Right. Yeah. The lawyer thing seems like a past life at this point. And it's been great. And that's exactly what it is. Process is art, documenting. I'm trying to extract from the experiences that I've had some helpful information that could be potentially transformative for other people.
Well, it seems like, look, just talking to you, I feel now I want to be more serious about the plant-based thing, maybe move around a little bit more. I think it's very important, like, to move around and work your muscles and stuff, particularly as you get older and older, so that they don't get, they start to atrophy so much faster. I think for the first time in my life in the past few years, I realized, and this is going to sound kind of stupid, that food is fuel, and you can't, how you create the fuel in your life is extremely important for your brain, for your body, for your emotions, for everything. And so and a lot of it has come from talking to you, and even like this podcast here is makes me think again. Like, it reminds me of, oh yeah, that's why this is important to me.
And I think also because you're on the cusp of turning 50, it's really important to make sure that your habits around food and lifestyle are, on the healthy end of the spectrum, because stuff that we could get away with in our 20s and our 30s that start to begin to elude us in our 40s become untenable in our 50s. And that's where everything starts to catch up to you.
I think I'm roughly on the healthy end in the sense that A, there's awareness, B, I don't really have any like bad habits, but I probably haven't really understood the good habits as well as I should. So I try to eat healthy. I don't eat anything unhealthy, let's put it that way. In the spectrum of, I'm in the spectrum of healthy all the time, I think. And I don't really drink, I don't smoke, I don't do anything. But, I am turning 50, so it's all I feel like that's like a big change. Like, I got to really take it more seriously.
I think it is important to take it more seriously. I don't think you need a life reboot. And you're naturally thin also. So like managing your weight has probably never been an issue for you. Like,
I would say in my 40s though, if I continue just eating what I was eating, I was going to start expanding. Like, I felt it.
Right.
And so I had to eat less.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that was the answer. I just know it worked to maintain.
I think that a healthy way to think about it, to conceptualize it, is not from a place of like, I should do this. If I don't do this, bad things are going to happen. And rather look at it like, I want to feel good. Like, I want to have good energy. I don't want to be depressed. I want to feel strong in my body, because that vitality, that life force infects every aspect of your life, your relationships, your career. There's nothing that's not impacted by that, right? So it's not about like obligation, because I don't think that works as an external motivator. It's about, look, this is in many ways is a self-help podcast. Like, how can we better ourselves? Well, the first portal to all of this is food. Like, what are you putting into your body? You're not going to put sand into your Ferrari. So why are you shoveling junk down your throat? Because it gives you a momentary, good feeling that you then pay for hours and hours and hours, and potentially becomes, very problematic as we age.
How many hours a day do you sleep?
8 hours, super important to me.
Yeah.
I don't get it. The one thing I have noticed as I get older, James, and I don't know if this is your experience, like, it becomes like sleep becomes more difficult and challenging. Like, it eludes me unless I'm very diligent about like what I need to do before I go to bed, and, removing the stress and all that kind of stuff, because I'll just wake up at like 4 o'clock in the morning or whatever, or I'll wake up naturally after 4 or 5 hours when I know that like I can't perform the way that I want to unless I'm getting 7 or 8.
I definitely need the 8. It's like the 8's almost the minimum. and I have been having problems getting the 8 lately. My schedule's kind of changed in weird ways, and I'm trying to figure out how to get the 8, whether it's possible to break it up, or I need to sleep later, or I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still figuring that out, because I've started doing like 3 to 6 times a week. I started doing stand-up comedy,
I know.
and that's late at night, and it's later than it's usually I'm performing later than I would normally go to sleep, or start winding down at least, and that's been challenging for me.
And are you able to sleep in when you're up that late?
I don't like to sleep in, because that's usually when I like to write.
Yeah.
So there's been a give and take that I'm still kind of working through. I kind of have to give up something, and I think
it's tricky. That's tricky. It's also like when your schedule's different, like every day, right? So you can never get into like a pattern.
Yeah. So you've been doing many things since the last time we spoke. What's been the biggest challenges and things that have been happening? I don't even really know. Like, I was going all over your blog and Twitter. You don't really blog as much, but you podcast a lot.
Right.
And your podcast guests are always interesting. You just had Lance Armstrong on. You got in touch with me. You had Lance Armstrong on the same day, or you released that episode the same day I released the Floyd Landis episode. And
So crazy.
They were both the Tour de France. Floyd Landis famously being the whistleblower on Lance Armstrong for the doping. And, so you always have these high performance athletes on. What have you been learning from your podcast?
The podcast has been amazing. It's true, I don't blog that much anymore because all of that energy is going into the podcast, but I do try to write a nice blog post that goes with each episode to try to, and I know you do that as well, to try to provide a little bit of insider perspective on the guest and the conversation that goes beyond just their bio. So probably that blogging energy has been invested in that. But, I'm sure you would agree, like the podcast for me has been just an unbelievably wild, amazing ride.
Well, it's great because you get to have these sorts of conversations with anyone you want.
Yeah,
I mean, I've had the most people say no, right? I don't know if most people say no to you. I'll ask 50 people to go on the podcast, and a few will say yes, and most will be they're out of the country, or I only like doing it in person.
Me too.
So most people it's just not feasibly possible. But it's an amazing thing to live a life where you can talk to all these super high achievers.
It's the greatest thing ever. I mean, it's almost a scam. I almost feel guilty about it. Like, okay, I'm going to get this person. I'm going to hold them hostage and hijack them, and I get to ask them all the questions I ever wanted to know. And then you get to share that with people, and then people get to then take that and use it to improve their lives. Like, there's no greater thing. Like, I just love everything about it. And I know you've been doing this for a while, and I have too. I started in 2012, and when I started it wasn't cool to have a podcast back then, and I didn't know how long I would do it, and it just continues to grow and build, and I just get more enthusiastic and excited about it. It's cool that the space, around this has grown so much, and now there are so many new people who are kind of learning about the wonderful world of podcasting for the very first time.
Have you debated mixing up the format a little bit? So you and I both do like classic, and we do well with it. We do classic interview style podcasts, which I enjoy doing because then we can have these. I almost call it conversation style rather than interview style. I don't like the straight interview. I like it when it's more like you and I know each other. We have a history. We can have a conversation. I prefer those, but I think there's also the type of podcast where the production quality is a little bit higher and it's more storytelling, and you're going out in the field and doing something, and that's part of the podcast. But that's too difficult.
Yeah, I mean that's
a lot
of work. Like those Gimlet and NPR shows, like sometimes it takes months and months for them
to make 6 episodes
to do that, and that's a very different thing. Like that's not a skill that I have, but I have thought about playing with the format a little bit. I mean, one thing that I started doing maybe this past year is putting up additional episodes, which are like Q&As or talks that I give when I travel, and just the audio from those. So every week I'll do a long form conversation like you do, and then every other week I'll put up some other kind of interesting audio that I have, like in the just from the folders from the past. Like, I was in, like I just put one up. I was in Ireland. We did an event and a Q&A, and just put that audio up. So that's a little tweak on the formula, but I'd be interested in like what other ways there are to play with this in a way that are.
I have an idea for you.
Yeah, what's that?
You should totally do Facebook Lives, and
I've done them
and
once
do
in a
Q&A
while
with them.
Yeah, and then put that audio up as a podcast as well.
No, I don't even think I think it's just a separate thing. Like you announce on Twitter, hey, in a half hour or in 10 minutes, I'm going to do a Facebook Live for 30 to 60 minutes. Ask any questions you have, or I'll tell a story about what's been happening with me, or give some tips about something, or you ask questions that people have asked you in emails. You find some way to get content, and you do those Facebook Lives. They build up. You'll be getting 10, 20,000 views a video or more, and that's not the same as a podcast, but then people see you, and it's just a different way to communicate with the fans.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not it's not adding to your podcast, but it's complementing. And I think it's just another outlet which doesn't really take that much extra energy.
I have done that from time to time. I just haven't done it with any kind of structured regularity.
Same with me.
So you've been doing that as well?
I thought I was going to do it every day, and I did it 2 days in a row, and then I got busy the third day, and I haven't done it since.
Yeah.
So maybe I did it once since then. When AJ Jacobs had a book out, we did one. But I'd like to do more of those. I think video is important.
Well, I have dipped my toe into video, and we started filming the podcasts. And so I think I have the last 5 or 6 of them are all on video on my YouTube channel. And that's been an interesting exploration or experiment.
Another format you can do is playing with where you're playing with story is take like 6 post 50 people, age 50 people, and on your podcast, maybe one. You kind of do a mini series within your podcast. So one of your episodes on the weeks that you do too is you talk to 1 to 6 of these guys or women and go over what they've been doing and improve it. And then we follow their story, and you kind of coaching them in their story as they, you call it like Iron 50 or the Ultra 50 series. If you're going to get them to be their max potential.
That's a really good idea. You're not the first person to suggest that. So that's definitely something that I think is worth exploring, either in podcast format or perhaps even in documentary format.
Or both.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's something you can play with both. Or it's a way you could pitch the documentary format.
Yeah.
Is by starting in the podcast format with some video. So
it's a really good idea. Yeah. I mean, I think you have to continually evolve, and that's why I started getting into video. I noticed a lot of other people were doing it. And I don't know who's going to sit and watch a 2-hour podcast like on YouTube, but certain people do it. And then you can chop that video up and, repurpose it across all the other channels and platforms, take the best little chunks out of it with short format stuff. And
I think podcasts people listen to on their commutes and in the gym and maybe at their desk a little bit. So I don't necessarily think the video of a podcast is the most popular format for it, but it's interesting to do. And that's why I say the Facebook Live or other things are almost separate but complementary.
Right.
Or like a documentary is like complementary and it adds to it all, but it's part of an empire rather than like just adding dimensionality to the podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but what I want to know is what's Julie's favorite cookbook so I could see what food to eat.
What's her favorite cookbook?
Yeah.
Well, probably her own cookbook,
yeah,
The Plant Power Way.
Which we've talked about before. What's the name of it?
That's right. The Plant Power Way.
Plant Power Way.
And then she just, this past year, released a new one called This Cheese is Nuts. It's a nut-based cheese cookbook, which is amazing. She figured out how to make unbelievably delicious cheese with nuts and seeds without any dairy, and like blue cheese, camembert, mozzarella, like insane. Like I'm like, I don't know how you do this, but it's unbelievable how good this stuff tastes and how close it tastes to like what you'd expect it to taste like.
Do you know Bill Glazer?
Yes.
So last time I was in LA, I visited Bill, and he had a chef, and the chef made a quote unquote Big Mac with cheese. He made pasta, bacon, and vanilla ice cream. And so everything tasted exactly like a Big Mac. It tasted exactly like a bowl of pasta. Tasted exactly like ice cream. Tasted exactly like bacon, 100%. And it was all plant-based, and there was no dairy, and it was just great.
It's a crazy world out there, James. I mean, I think it's really interesting what's happening in the food space right now. It's inarguable that our current methodologies for producing food to feed the planet are unsustainable and are wreaking all kinds of environmental havoc on the planet. And
That's why Eric Schmidt, the chairman of Google, says the number
biggest
one trend.
technology is plant-based food technology. Yes, because we need to innovate new ways, more sustainable ways, more compassionate ways to provide enough food to feed everybody as we head towards 10 billion people on the planet. Well, how are we going to do that? Factory farming is just decimating our rainforests, and it's polluting our water table and acidifying our oceans and leading to mass species extinction. Like, you could just go on forever about like the deleterious impact of our current system of animal agriculture. And so now we're seeing the advent of not just plant-based meat and dairy companies like Hampton Creek and Beyond Meat and the Impossible Burger, but now we have Uma Valetti at Memphis Meats, who's figuring out how to take cells out of a live animal and essentially cultivate them in this brewing process that produces meat without a sentient animal, which is insane. Like, that's as crazy as flying cars. Yeah, it's like Uma Valetti's, I think he's on the cover of, it's either Inc. or Fortune.
Memphis Meats?
It's called Memphis Meats. Unbelievable, like, what this company is doing. Hampton Creek is also moving in that direction of developing, it's called lab cultured meat. There's a couple interesting books coming out about this soon as well. So that's a space that I think is going to explode. And it's as bizarre as it is, like the idea that we can have meat without the animal. Like, this is the crazy future that we're inching ourselves towards. At the same time, you go to any grocery store and suddenly, there was that one weird, soy milk or almond milk, and now like half the dairy section is plant-based milks. That was not the case even a couple of years ago. So I think we're seeing technologists, we're seeing the financial communities, the venture capitalists.
Even the standard meat companies like Tyson Foods or General, I forget which one, set aside $200 million for a VC fund to invest in plant-based companies.
I believe that was Campbell. Like, they're making a really solid, conscious effort to incubate companies in this space. A lot of them will acquire them, but they're also trying to create food labels under their banner. Like, it's clear that this is where we're going, and the smarter companies and investors out there are paying very close attention to this space, and I think it's super exciting.
So, look, Rich, thanks once again coming on the podcast. It's always a super pleasure. I learned so much. I feel like it changes my life every single time you come on. I highly recommend your podcast, the Rich Roll Podcast. I don't know. Do you have any other name for it? I call it the Rich Roll
Podcast. That's what it's called.
In your memoir,
Finding Ultra.
Yeah,
second edition is coming out in April.
What's the difference between the second edition?
I wrote a whole new chapter. It's about 30% different. Rewrote the whole book. Updated all the appendices. Much improved.
Oh,
so
great.
I'm excited about that.
I can't wait to read that.
Yeah.
So, well, thanks once again for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, James.
Hey, I am so glad you listened to this episode. I myself really enjoyed it. It's a special episode. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Please take a moment to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever it is you get your podcasts. It will only take you a second, but it will help other people discover the podcast. And my goal is to share this great content with as many people as possible. To see the show notes, just head on over to jamesaltucher.com/podcast. While you are there, you can join my free insiders list to get notified when I post a new podcast. Every day, I also share my best and most controversial ideas. You won't get this stuff anywhere else. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry, and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. oracle.com/advance.